My business card says I'm the general manager of Oak Haven Properties, which sounds impressive until you realize it's the small, struggling real estate company my parents own. In reality, I'm not a manager. I'm a firefighter. My morning, so far, has consisted of talking a tenant down from breaking their lease, negotiating with a plumber to fix a burst pipe in Unit 3, and running payroll because my father insists on using an accounting system from 1998. It's not yet 10 o'clock. For the past 8 years since I graduated with a business degree, this has been my life. I handle the marketing, the bookkeeping, the tenant disputes, the repairs, everything. I do it all for a small stipend and the privilege of living in the unrenovated basement apartment of one of our buildings. My brother David is a junior associate at a law firm in the city. When he comes home for the holidays, my parents toast his success, marveling at his paycheck and his fancy title. No one ever toasts me for increasing our occupancy rate by 15% or for saving us $20,000 a year by refinancing our debt. My success isn't seen as success, it's seen as my duty. It's just what I'm supposed to do. When I once gently brought up the idea of a real salary, my father put his arm around me and gave me the speech I'd heard 1,000 times. Anna, we're not building this for us, we're building it for you and your brother. Everything we have will be yours one day. Why would you take money out of your own inheritance? And that was the deal. The unspoken, unbreakable contract. I would pour my youth, my energy, and my expertise into keeping this business afloat. I would sacrifice my own financial independence for the good of the family. In exchange, one day, the legacy I was building would be mine to share. It was a promise that made the 80-hour work weeks, the missed vacations, and the constant stress feel like a down payment on my future. It was the only thing that made it all make sense. This arrangement, this silent contract where my work was exchanged for a future inheritance, began the day I had to choose a college. I remember sitting at the dinner table, buzzing with excitement, holding a brochure for a university out of state with a renowned art history program. It was my dream. My father glanced at the pamphlet, then at me, with a look of paternal disappointment that could crush mountains. Art? History? He said, the words heavy with disbelief. Anna, that's a hobby, not a career. It's a waste of a good mind. My mother was quick to support him. Besides, honey, we'd miss you so much. And the business, your father isn't getting any younger. A business degree from the state school would be so practical. You could help us right away. They framed it as concern for my future, as a sensible financial decision. But what they were really doing was drafting me. My brother David, on the other hand, was encouraged to apply to the best pre-law programs in the country. His ambition was a source of pride, an asset that brought prestige to the family name. My ambition was a liability that needed to be redirected back into the family business. I gave up my dream without a fight, convincing myself that being the practical, helpful daughter was a more noble path. I chose their dream for me, and in exchange, I accepted the promise that my sacrifice would one day be rewarded. That reward always felt closest after I pulled them out of a fire. About 4 years ago, my father made a terrible investment, leveraging one of our properties against a venture that collapsed. We were on the brink of bankruptcy. We received a default notice that sent him into a panic-fueled rage, but I went into action. For a month, I barely slept. I spent my days on the phone, with angry bankers and my nights creating a new financial plan from scratch. I found a loophole in a zoning law that allowed us to reclassify one of our buildings for mixed commercial use, securing a high-value, long-term tenant that essentially saved the entire company. I did the work of a Wharton MBA, and I did it from my basement apartment. When the crisis was over, when the new lease was signed and our finances were stable, my parents took me out to a modest dinner. My father raised his glass. "To family," he said, beaming. "When the going gets tough, we pull together and we survive. I'm so proud of us." He patted my hand and said, "You were a real trooper through all that, sweetheart." A trooper. A sweetheart. Not a brilliant manager who had just single-handedly saved his entire net worth. My monumental professional achievement was reduced to a pat on the head, my contribution absorbed into the collective we. I smiled and thanked him, burying the sting of resentment under the familiar comfort of the promise. I was investing. This was all just sweat equity in my own future. The turning point didn't come with a dramatic confession or a tearful argument. It arrived silently, on a Tuesday night, buried in a stack of manila folders. My father needed to refinance our largest commercial property, a complex process, and he'd tasked me with preparing the mountain of paperwork for the bank. "I need everything, Anna," he'd said, handing me the key to the old filing cabinet in his office. "Tax returns, deeds, partnership agreements, the works. You know where it all is." He trusted me with the mechanics of his financial survival, but not, I was about to learn, with the truth of his intentions. I was in the office alone, surrounded by the quiet hum of the building. Around midnight, deep in the cabinet, I found a thick, leather-bound folder I'd never seen before, simply labeled Personal and Estate. I hesitated for a moment, a pang of guilt stopping my hand. But I reasoned that there could be trust documents or ownership papers inside that the bank would need. My job was to be thorough. I opened it. Inside, nestled between insurance policies and car titles, was their last will and testament, updated and signed just 6 months prior. My heart began to beat a little faster. I told myself I was just checking the legal ownership structure of the properties. I found the section on asset distribution and scanned the page. My name was there. My brother's name was there. And the words printed in cold black ink dismantled my entire world in less than 10 seconds. It was all there, brutally clear. The controlling interest in Oakhaven Properties, LLC, all buildings, all capital assets, and the primary family home were to be transferred into a trust for the sole benefit of my brother David. He was the legacy. I was a footnote. To his beloved daughter, Anna, the will read, they were leaving a one-time cash bequest of $50,000. In gratitude for her many years of loyal and familial support, $50,000. For 8 years of 80-hour weeks. For saving the company from bankruptcy. For sacrificing my own dreams. It wasn't an inheritance, it was a severance package. A tip for the maid after she'd cleaned the house for the last time. Every promise, every, "This will all be yours," every affectionate, "We're a team," it all curdled in my memory into what it really was, a lie. A calculated, long-term deception to secure my unpaid labor. I wasn't an heir, I was an asset. The most profitable, cost-effective, and dedicated employee they ever had. And I had just discovered that my contract, the one I had built my life on, was void. A cold, hard clarity washed over me. The grief was already freezing into rage, and the rage was sharpening into a plan. I carefully placed the will back in the folder, my hands steady. The loyal daughter had just clocked out. The exploited manager was ready to renegotiate her terms. After I discovered the will, a strange calm settled over me. The anger was still there, a cold, dense star in my chest, but my actions were guided by a new, sharp clarity. I was no longer a hopeful daughter. I was a forensic accountant investigating my own life. I needed to know if this deception was a passive oversight or an active, ongoing strategy. So I designed one final test, a proposal so logical and mutually beneficial that their rejection of it would be the final piece of evidence I needed. I spent a week researching. I found a small, undervalued duplex in a neighborhood that was rapidly gentrifying. The numbers were perfect, a low-risk investment with a high potential for rental income. I drew up a full business plan, complete with market analysis, projected revenue, and a request for the family company, Oakhaven Properties, to act as a guarantor on the loan, allowing me to secure it. The company would take on minimal risk, share in the profits, and add a valuable asset to its portfolio. I, in turn, would finally have a tangible piece of equity in my name. It was my attempt to turn the vague promise of someday into a concrete reality today. My father was first. I scheduled a formal meeting in the office, laying out the binders and spreadsheets as I would for any bank. He listened intently, nodding, a proud smile on his face. "This is brilliant, Anna," he said when I finished. "Your mother and I are so proud of the business mind you've developed." I held my breath. "But," he continued, the smile never leaving his face, "the answer is no. We can't leverage the company for a side project right now. Besides," he said, leaning forward and lowering his voice to a confidential, fatherly tone, "why would you need a little duplex of your own when all of this is going to be yours one day anyway? He used the lie. He looked me straight in the eye and used the lie that I now knew was a lie as the reason to deny me. It was the coldest, most calculated thing I had ever witnessed. It wasn't just a betrayal, it was a masterclass in manipulation. Next, I went to my mother, hoping for an appeal to fairness, to a mother's love. I found her in the garden and explained my desire for a small piece of security, something that was truly mine. She listened with a pained sympathy that I now recognized as completely hollow. "Oh, honey, that sounds lovely," she said, snipping a dead rose from a bush. "But you know how your father is. You can't push him. He has to feel in control. You have a good life here. You don't pay rent. Let's not rock the boat." She wasn't my ally. She was his accomplice, the keeper of the status quo, the person whose job was to smooth over any inconvenient ambition I might have. Her betrayal was quieter, softer, but just as profound. She would always choose his comfort over my future. The final call was to David, my brother, the future king. I explained the business plan to him, framing it as a low-risk way to grow the company he was set to inherit. His response was a dismissive, patronizing laugh. Anna, he said, as if talking to a child. "Leave the big acquisitions to Dad. And me, okay? You're fantastic at running the day-to-day, but this is a bit out of your league. We've got a long-term strategy you don't need to worry about." There it was. He didn't see me as a future partner. He saw me as the staff, a caretaker for his inheritance. The test was complete. The results were unanimous. They had all, in their own way, confirmed the truth I found in that will. My role was to work, and their role was to profit. It was time to submit my invoice. For the next 2 weeks, I became the ghost in my own life. On the surface, I was the same dutiful daughter, the efficient manager. I went to work, I answered my father's calls, I handled tenant issues. But in the quiet of my basement apartment, at night I wasn't managing their business, I was auditing my own stolen career. I spent hours researching market rate salaries for property managers with my level of experience and portfolio size. I went through 8 years of financial records, calculating the exact value I had created, the money saved on refinancing deals, the revenue generated from new leases I secured, the thousands of dollars in repairs I had negotiated down. I compiled spreadsheets, cross-referenced documents, and built a case with the meticulous, detached precision of a lawyer preparing for trial. The emotional daughter who had cried over a will was gone. In her place was a creditor preparing an invoice. I was just waiting for the right moment to deliver it. My parents, in their blissful ignorance, handed it to me on a silver platter. They called a family dinner on a Sunday. My brother David was there, looking pleased with himself. Over dessert, my father cleared his throat and made a grand announcement. "Your mother and I have decided to take a trip," he said, beaming. "We've booked a 2-month cruise through the Mediterranean, all inclusive. We deserve to finally relax." I felt the cold star of anger in my chest pulse once, then go still. 2 months. I hadn't taken more than a 3-day weekend in 8 years. My mother then turned to me, her eyes shining with excitement. "And we had a brilliant idea," she said. "While we're gone, it's the perfect time to finally renovate the master bathroom and kitchen at the house. We've already picked out the designs." She slid a heavy binder full of contractor bids and architectural plans across the table toward me. "You're so wonderful with all of this stuff, Anna. We know you'll manage it perfectly for us." There it was, the final intolerable act of exploitation, delivered with a cheerful, entitled smile. They were going to sail around the world on the profits of my labor, while I was expected to stay behind and manage their household renovations for free. It was so brazen, so utterly tone-deaf, it was almost beautiful in its purity. This was the moment, the perfect, unassailable justification for what I was about to do. I looked at the binder, then back at their smiling, expectant faces. I felt a sense of calm so profound it was almost unnerving. I was ready. "It sounds like a big project," I said, my voice even. "You're right. I'll handle it. Let's schedule a formal business meeting for Friday morning before you book the contractors, just to finalize the budget and the terms of my management." My father clapped his hands in delight. Excellent. See? We can always count on you. He had no idea what kind of terms I was preparing. Friday morning, I was in the office conference room by 8 a.m. I didn't spread out the renovation plans my mother had given me. Instead, on the polished mahogany table, I placed 3 folders. The first contained a market analysis of executive salaries in real estate management. The second contained a detailed 8-year summary of every major financial contribution I had made to the company. The third contained a single, professionally formatted invoice and my letter of resignation. I sat at the head of the table, my father's usual spot, and waited. My parents walked in at 9:15, coffee in hand, laughing about something my brother had said on the phone. "Good morning, sweetie," my mother chirped, ready to talk about kitchen cabinets. "All right, Anna, let's see what you've got for us," my father said, taking a seat. I slid the third folder across the table to him. "This is what I have for you," I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. "This meeting is not about your renovation. It's about my compensation." He opened the folder, his smile faltering as he read the words invoice and letter of resignation. My mother peered over his shoulder, her hand flying to her mouth. "What is this?" my father demanded, his voice dangerously low. "Is this a joke?" I calmly pushed the other 2 folders toward him. "It's an audit," I replied. "For 8 years, I have served as your general manager, bookkeeper, and project lead. The first folder contains an analysis of the average market salary for those roles. The second is a conservative estimate of the value I have created for this company. The invoice is for services rendered, minus my stipend and cost of lodging. The total back pay owed is $874,000. The silence in the room was absolute. Then, the explosion. "Are you insane?" my father roared, slamming his fist on the table. "This is blackmail. You are our daughter." My mother began to cry. "Anna, how could you, after everything we've done for you? We gave you a home, a job. You gave me a job with the promise of a future payment." I cut her off, my voice like ice. "A promise I recently discovered you never intended to honor." I looked my father in the eye. "I've seen the will. My inheritance is a $50,000 tip. You don't get to call me family when it's convenient and treat me like an employee when it's profitable. You made this a business transaction. I'm just formalizing the paperwork." I stood up. "You have 2 options. You can pay the invoice as a severance package, and I will walk away. Or my lawyer can file a wage and partnership claim in court. Given the 8 years of documentation I have, I am very confident of the outcome." The look on their faces was the only reward I would ever need. The arrogance, the condescension, it all melted away, replaced by the raw, ugly fear of people who have been caught. The masters of the game had just been checkmated by the pawn they never thought would move. "I'll expect a call from your lawyer," I said, and walked out of the room, leaving them to stare at the true price of my loyalty. It took them 3 weeks, 3 weeks of panicked calls between them, their lawyers, and my own, but in the end, they knew they had no choice. They paid. The settlement agreement came with a thick non-disclosure clause, which I was more than happy to sign. Silence was a price I would gladly pay for my freedom. The day the money transferred to my account, I didn't feel a rush of victory. I just felt quiet. It wasn't celebration money, it was restitution. It was the closing of a painful chapter. I packed up my basement apartment, left the keys on the counter, and drove away without looking back. 6 months later, I am in a city I always wanted to live in. I used a portion of the settlement as a down payment on a small duplex, the very one I had pitched to my father, and I am living in one unit while I renovate the other. I'm my own boss, my own manager, my own project lead. The work is hard, but it's honest, and every ounce of sweat equity I put in is for my own future, not someone else's. I am building something that is truly mine, on my own terms. The rest of the money is invested, managed by a professional, and it will serve as the foundation for the life I should have been building all along. I heard from a distant cousin that my parents sold Oakhaven Properties. Without me there to run the day-to-day, the business became a burden they could no longer manage. They retired and moved to a condo somewhere down south. My brother David, the intended heir, inherited nothing but a tax bill and the consequences of a family business that was hollowed out by its own greed. They never got to take their Mediterranean cruise. My story is for every person who has poured their talent and energy into a family business or a family promise, only to be told that their compensation is love or a future that never arrives. Your value is not determined by your bloodline. It is determined by your work, your skill, and your dedication. You have the right to demand that it be recognized in concrete, unambiguous terms. If you've ever had to fight to turn an obligation into a contract, share your experience below. Let's remind everyone that family should be a safe harbor, not an excuse for exploitation.